Sorry, give me 1 second. I just want to make sure I don't screw this up. Okay. So we're going to say default 0. So by default, if you insert somebody into this database, they're not going to be an undergrad, and then you have to say that they are an undergrad. Okay. So there's our table. So here's what I'm going to do. All right. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test out this table. Okay. So we're literally just going to type this in exactly how we did it. Okay, so I want to sort of show you one thing. So this is one thing that I did. Like, I forgot how SQL syntax works when I was writing this lab, and I had a bug for a while because I didn't test out my table at the SQL plus command line before I put it in my SQL file. So I did this. Okay, let's see what happens. So that's why I use SQL+. You can't actually do that. So if you think about it, it doesn't make sense to say not null default 0 because a default already implies that it's not going to be null, right? Because it says when you insert into this table, if you don't supply a value, it's going to give it something. So this is a legal syntax in SQL, but if I didn't know that, I might put this in my SQL file and then never really know why the lab isn't working. So let's try this again, but without that. And we'll do is undergrad small int default 0. Okay. So this is another thing, and I forgot about this. So it's a good thing that we're testing this out. So constraint names are global to your entire database. So that means, and this might be important for the part 2 of the lab, that if you already have a constraint named email OK, which you can see already exists, you can't have another constraint in another table named email OK. Okay? So we'll just get around that. Okay. Undergrad small default 0. Okay, so now our table's been created. So this is in our database, so we can query it. One sec. Select from weeks 339 to right, and there's nothing in that table, so that's what we would expect. So, question?
So, if the constraint is global, how would you put it like existing?
It's a good question. I don't know. So let me check on that, and I'll get back to you. Question? Yeah. Yeah, so that's the same question. I think probably I need to check on that. Um, yeah, probably. Okay, so just as a guiding example, we're going to do an insert into EECS 339 TAs. Hold on. Okay, so yeah, sorry, I always forget the syntax of this. So we'll do name, email, age, is undergrad, uh, and then you do values, and then we'll say like Mike. Uh, Here's one of my emails. Then how I'm 22, and I am not an undergrad, so I'm gonna put a 0 in there. Cool. So now I can do like same thing, select everything from EECS 339 TAs, and cool. So the formatting's a little bit weird, but now I'm in there, right? So I could do other queries like select from EECS 339 TAs where name equals Mike. Ah, shoot, what did I do wrong? Oh, yeah, my bad. Okay, so I'm Mike, or I could just say select age, right? And it's going to tell me I'm 22. And then, like, if I said select where name equals Brian, not in there. Okay. And then, as one more thing, so we can also, now that we have a default, which again might come in handy for you guys sometimes, so we could insert into EECS 339 TAs, and we only need to insert name, email, and actually we don't need a name or an age. So what I'm going to say values Brian and Brian at Brian.com. Yes, Brian at Brian.com. Okay, and this should work just fine. So yeah, so you can kind of see here, hopefully, I know it's a little bit ugly, that the first row is still me, and my email address, my age, and is undergrad. Then there's Brian, right, with his email, Brian at Brian.com. The age is null, right, so we didn't give it a default. We didn't say it's not null, so it's going to let us not insert anything in there, and it's just null. And we talked about what null means in class. And then because we gave a default for is undergrad is set to 0, which is good because Brian's not an undergrad. Okay, so now let's say that, now let's say that we want to modify this table. So maybe we thought about it and is undergrad is stupid, or we want to add another column. So what we're going to do, all right, really simple. We're just going to type drop table EECS 339 TAs. And it's dropped. And now if we try to select, right, the table's not in there. So this is really important when you're working on the lab because you're probably going to do this a lot. At least that's the way it worked for me. I added a column, made sure that I could query that column, everything is okay, and then added enough to implement certain functionality, got that working, and then added more to my table to implement more functionality. Right, that's a good way to approach part 2. So this is how you do that, and then to modify or to run this. So I'm just going to reflect that that change that we made. So just like you run SQL plus username/password at rwb.sql to run the script from the command line. All you need to do once you're in SQL Plus is just run rwb.sql. Now pay attention to what's going to happen. Right? Lots and lots of errors. But they're not really errors. Because if you think about what that did, right, basically what that does is it goes into this file and it runs every single command in there. But you can't insert or you can't create a new table with the same name as an existing table. So most of these are going to just be that, right? So if we go up to the top, oops, sorry. Yeah, so like here's an example, right? It says it can't create the table RWB actions because the name is already used. Great, that's what we want it to say. But it also says table created, right? And that's what you need to look for when you're inserting a new table from your script. Okay? So that's basically all I wanted to talk about with this part, with like adding, modifying, and dropping tables, regenerating them. Are there any questions about any of this? And I know I'll get back to you guys on the thing with constraints. So any other questions? Okay, great. Okay, so showing how the Perl generates HTML. So let's take a look quickly. Sorry. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but hopefully we can spend a little bit of time. So give me a sec here. Sorry guys, give me a second. Okay, I think I got it working again. Okay, sorry about that, guys. All right, so looking at how the Perl generates HTML. So this is really important for part one of the project, and all of them, but like especially part one. So, so I'll take you through the way that I figured this out, because again, like when I did this lab, even like when I did this lab right before this class started, I did not know any HTML or JavaScript. I just figured it out by looking at the code. So I basically looked at this and I was like, okay, it says you are anonymous here somewhere, right? So probably says that in the Perl somewhere, because I know that the Perl generates the HTML. So I just searched for you are anonymous. And look at that. So we can get a lot out of just this little piece of the Perl. So this basically says if the user is this special anon thing, like user is a variable that was set earlier, then it prints this. So so the way that this works, right, is that normally when you print, this is just like printing in any other language. Normally when you print to standard out, right, or sometimes standard error, but generally it shows up at your command prompt. Okay, so somewhere in this file, or somewhere else, I don't know where, Professor Dinda has changed this so that instead of printing to standard out, it prints to an HTML file that we're not seeing. So that's the way that the Perl generates the HTML. It sounds fancy. It literally just prints the HTML it wants. So in terms of HTML, right, this P tag, right, so like you open things like that, and then you close them with like, this angle bracket, but you put this slash at the beginning. So P just means paragraph. Here, right, it's like, it literally just has the text that you want, right? And then this thing right here is, so this is forget what they call this, but like you can click on, but like the way this works is when you see this ahref tag, it means that you're going to display this text right here. See where it says login, but when you click on it, it'll take you to this link. Okay. So any questions about that? Do you guys want me to? So the rest of this is basically. I mean, we can sort of take a look through the rest of this if you want me to sign in as root, and then I'll show you how that kind of works. Do you want that, or do we sort of get the idea of how the HTML gets generated? Okay, does anybody want me to log in as root and then go through the rest of this block? Okay, cool. All right, in that case, let's look at near. So I'm going to get this out of here. So this near thing, okay, so like how do these actions work? Well, so there's this cool thing about how this URI works, right, is that it's like you have the URL portion here, like the locator, right, so this says like, okay, we're going to go to this server, this directory, and run this script. Then you have this question mark, and everything after that is just like a parameter that you can set. And then you can pass that back and forth between your HTML and your JavaScript. So one thing that I could say is like, and you separate them with this ampersand. So one thing that I could say is like act equals login. And then it takes me to the login page. And that's kind of how this works. That's kind of how like the Perl and the HTML and the JavaScript decide what you're going to see on screen. Another thing that you can type is act equals base. And that's going to take me back to this base page. So as you're going through, especially like part 2 of the lab, this is going to be helpful to know that this is how actions work, because it's important for like when you want to show a different form on screen. So another action that you can have is this near thing. Okay, so everybody who is wondering, right, when the action is near, you see this table. So this table, so by default also, if I say debug equals 1, it's going to set that act equals near thing. And it's going to generate my tables for me. Okay, so question. So so when you're working over Git, basically the way that you're typically going to do it is you're going to pick one partner's code, and that is going to be like the code that you're going to update. So it'll be hosted on their machine, and you're going to only have like their Oracle username and password in there. So the way I recommend doing it is like choose that one partner, make sure that that partner is polling often, and just only go to their net ID instead of yours. So unfortunately, I don't have a better answer than that. That's kind of the way that that's going to have to work. But you can always test things on yours and then copy them over into your Git repository. Okay, so any other questions before I keep going? Yeah, yeah, no problem.
I'm wondering, like, what triggers, like, the database to load new data? If, like, you need to, like, a different area,
Oh, sure. Okay, so these actions are kind of exactly how that happens. So let's jump into it. So just for people who didn't hear and also people watching the screencast, the question was, how does the database how does the web app decide when it's going to query the database for new data, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's a good question. That's kind of the crux of what I'm trying to show you guys. So this near thing, you kind of have to mess with it a lot in the beginning of the lab, and it's not as straightforward as to how it shows up on the page. Suffice to say that this near thing is getting run all the time. So it's a really useful place to be updating your code because, say, you want to be showing committees and candidates. No matter, this is going to fire all the time, so you'll be able to see the change, right? So let's see. So here in the JavaScript, so take a look at this, right? So read the comment. The way this works is basically once we sort of have all this other stuff in the JavaScript set, and this happens in a function called viewShift, by the way. So viewShift, very crucial to part 1 of the lab. It sort of asks Google Maps for stuff that it needs and asks for some cookies and does whatever else the JavaScript thinks it needs to be able to render the web page. And then it initiates a request back to the server. So this is the reason why this is getting run all the time. You're shifting your view all the time, and every time you shift your view, you run this near action, right? So this is how this happens, right? You look at this act thing, and by the way, you can find elsewhere in this code the reason why it's act some places and action other places, but basically it's just it uses this same kind of syntax, this param function, so anytime you shift the view, it's going to fire this near action. So so congratulations, I'm kind of giving you a little bit of an answer to part 1, so good job coming to discussion. So this sort of gives away how this works. If we look at how these interact, right, so the JavaScript invokes the Perl. There's this what parameter, right? So there are these other ones coming from, so these are all coming from the JavaScript, by the way. And the JavaScript is getting these from Google Maps. But what, so this what param, right, it comes from right here, right? So right now this code is hard-coded saying what is committees, candidates, right? And we went over in class how this regex works, right? So if the syntax is a little bit cryptic, that's okay, but the basic idea is that it takes whatever you give it, separates on the commas, and turns everything into a list, right? So in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to see that what is committees and candidates, and then it's going to set this hash table, right? So it goes into the hash. It says, and this thing is it's weird, but it's give me a list of everything comma separated and what, and then for each of those things, I want you to insert that as a key into my hash table, and I want the value to be 1. And up here, it's just saying, if you didn't set what, or if what is set to all, then I'm going to just hard code this hash table to look like this. Okay? And then what the rest of this code is doing is it goes through and it says, okay, go into this what hash, give me the value that's pointed to by this key committees, and if that, so in this case it's going to return a 1 or a 0, so if it's 1 it's going to go in, if it's 0 it's not going to go into this code block. It calls this committees function. Okay, so whenever you see this kind of syntax, right, that's a function or a subroutine, so you want to go and see what the definition looks like. And then you go down and you can see, okay, so it's querying the database, right? And you can get some other stuff from this, right? You can kind of understand, here's an important thing. Here's how it's selecting cycle, right? So it looks like cycle gets passed into this function, and one of the constraints on this query is I want you to give me all this stuff only where cycle is, and we've had some questions about this, so this question mark is kind of like when you're programming in C and you have %d for an integer, it's like that. So Whenever you see this question mark, it corresponds to one of these parameters that you pass the function later. So cycle equals cycle. Latitude is greater than latitude southwest. Cool. So that pipeline right there is basically what you need to modify in order to get part one of the lab working. So hopefully that helped. Any questions about any of that? Anything? Okay, awesome. And I intentionally left out like the part where it's actually drawing markers, but like most of you guys, I think, got past that point anyway. Okay, question?
So, on the left, that's a JavaScript.
Yep.
And it's getting out of the step route.
Mhm.
So is it getting the power from
Yep, basically. Yeah, so I mean, this is how it works. This is like the CGI side of things. So I know a little bit less about that, but yeah, that's basically how it works. And then, sorry, for those watching the screencast, the question is this part of the JavaScript right here, this get, the question is it basically just getting the Perl script and passing it these parameters? And the answer is yes, that's basically what it's doing. Okay, another question?
So in theoretically, if you had some HTML, say like a checkbox, and then a call, but then that would be in the profile, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
But then,
So yeah, so you can get into like an infinite loop here. Yeah, so you definitely can get into a sort of infinite loop here where you're making lots and lots and lots of requests back and forth. So it can just ping back and forth, and that's kind of how this thing works. Is like basically like the HTML can dynamically call some JavaScript functions, do some stuff, and then the JavaScript can generate or like can kick the Perl and say generate some HTML. So yes, you can step on your toes here. Question.
is that why the Oracle is getting so slow because of infinite calls here?
Potentially. So the question is that why the Oracle was getting so slow? And the answer is potentially. But we don't know, necessarily what people might be doing. So in general, it's because these databases are throttled. So it's like it'll only let a certain number of queries per time frame. And if you exceed that, then it'll start to slow stuff down. Also because of transactions, which is Professor Dinda just touched on that in the Piazza post, but that's kind of like a thing for way later in the course. Yeah, there are many reasons why this might slow down. So there's another question?
Yeah, is there any kind of caching going on here? Like, say you're asking for queries and candidates, and then you now add on that you want like individuals. Is it gonna like get all the queries and candidates here, or is it gonna keep that?
Yeah, so the question is, does basically is your browser or anybody else going to cache some of the HTML that you generated? And could that create a problem when you need to generate a new HTML with new parameters? Is that your question?
More like the data is coming out of
Oh, okay. So the question is like, is your browser cache going to affect like the queries that you're like the way that you're querying the database and what that's giving back to you? So generally no, because the way this is designed is for it to always be kicking the Perl and asking it to do those queries again. I don't think this is designed to really use the browser cache that much, but to be fair, I don't know. So it's possible. Professor Dinda would probably know the answer. He'd probably be able to give you a much more definite answer. Other questions? Yeah.
How much SQL are we gonna write for the first part? Is it kind of like written that we're supposed to do that first? But
Yep. Good question. So the question is, how much SQL do you need to write for part one, which is like the candidates, individuals, and cycles? So I sort of conceptually break that up into two parts. There's like the candidate and individual, and then there's the cycle. So for candidate and individual, you don't need to write any SQL. It's all in there for you. For the cycles part, you need to write one query. So you need to write a query to ask the database what cycles are available. Can't hard code that. and then you need to modify a query. So somewhere in here, we just looked at it. Actually, it's right on screen in this committees. This select says where cycle equals, right? So you, instead of wanting one cycle, you're going to want a range of cycles based on what the users choose. So you'll need to update, I think, several queries here. But they're very small updates. So in general, part one, there's not much SQL. It's more like reading the code base. Okay, question? Yeah, so the question marks in the SQL queries, so this is less about SQL and more about the way that Perl deals with strings. So the basic way that this works is that when you have a string in Perl, sometimes you might want to print the value of a variable. So anytime you see this question mark, it basically is telling the Perl, it's like, cycle, you're going to print cycle, then you're going to print equal, and then you're going to print something, right? Until the end of the string, it doesn't know what it's going to print there. So the question mark is like a placeholder, and then you add to this exec SQL thing, you add these parameters separated by commas, and it basically says, okay, the first question mark, I want you to substitute in the value of this first variable here. Second question mark, value of this second variable. Cool. Any more questions? Okay. Okay, cool. So I think I had one more thing on the agenda. Okay. I was going to go into like why you might get null dereference errors. So I'm just going to leave it at this because I'd need to write some code and we'd be here for a little while for me to show you. If you're looking at your console, there might be times when as you do part one, when the JavaScript yells at you that there's a null dereference. This is generally okay. So the reason, at least in my implementation, is that basically what I do is I on the JavaScript side, I take whatever has been selected from the checkboxes and then I do some stuff based on the names of the checkboxes that I gave. Right? So sometimes I end up calling functions with null because none of the checkboxes are selected. And then in my console, it'll complain null dereference. Okay, this is okay. If we were focusing on front end, maybe we wouldn't want this to happen. But the short of this is as long as everything looks okay, as long as you're meeting the requirements of what's supposed to be displayed on your web page according to the handout, you're going to get full credit. We're not going to be inspecting your console or elements or anything like that, so don't worry about that. Okay, and then, so you wanted to...
Yeah, I'm going to talk about emails.
Oh, okay.
So I saw a good question on Piazza asking about how to send an email. So I'm just going to show you guys really quickly how to send an email. And we can send an email to somebody in this class if we really want to. Or not. Doesn't really matter. All right. So if I just exit out of one of these, or you care if I quit all? All right. Where am I typing commands? Oh, I am. Very good. Oh, snap, the screen's right here. All right. So, with Perl, and I made a post on Piazza on this so you can actually see how you do it in Perl. I'm just going to show you the actual program. So there is a program under usr /bin, or no, not bin, sbin /send mail --t. And when you enter that, it kind of just shows a blank screen. So to make a mail, you would literally just say to : no, you do not. I tested this a second ago. All right, so I'm going to send one to myself. Don't send me mail unless you have questions. That's okay. Unless anybody wants me to send them a mail. So we have my email, which is typed wrong. Oh, let's edit that again. .northwestern. All right, we have to myself from, we'll send it from Murphy, so BTS 0842 at murphy.wot.eecs.northwestern.edu. And then you can say subject, tacos are yummy. Okay, and then you hit enter twice, and now you can give the subject of the email, or maybe where you'd conveniently put a link or something like that. Hey, Brian, did you know tacos? Tacos are a staple of all diets. Sure. Go to google.com to learn more. Great, yeah, we'll go with something like that. So you hit enter on it, you don't have to. And then to actually send the email, if you were just using a program like this, you just hit Control D, and it should have sent. So now, if I pull out my phone, let me check. I received a new email from BTS0842 at Murphy. And it says, tacos are yummy. I wonder what it's about. And then it basically has that body in there. So to do this in Perl, I posted on Piazza for it, but essentially you just open up an object called mail, and it uses that command that I showed you guys. And you just fill in those things, and you can set variables to be those strings that I was just typing instead. And there's a post on Piazza on how to do this. And that's going to come into use a bit later in the lab for some of you, or some of you guys are wondering about it right now. So yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to mention on video, just so we have a live example.
So we actually have 2 posts on Piazza.
Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Oh, then someone asked the question and didn't.
But you can literally copy and paste our code in Piazza. It's fine.
Yep, and I put the code in Piazza, copy paste it where you need it.
Okay, any more questions before I close the screencast you guys think would be relevant to everybody? Okay. Thanks for following along at home, folks. I sure hope that captured my screen.
That would not be